His own son called him a worthless freeloader and threw him out in front of everyone. But neither of them knew that within hours, an unexpected inheritance worth $1.3 billion would expose a decades-old secret, uncover a dangerous conspiracy, and change both of their lives forever. Stay until the end, subscribe to the channel, and don't miss this unforgettable story. I still remember the exact moment my own son looked at me with complete disgust. It wasn't because I had committed a crime. It wasn't because I had betrayed him. It wasn't because I had failed him as a father. It was because I looked like a man who had nothing left to offer the world. My name is Gustav Tornick. I am 67 years old, and for most of my life, I repaired industrial machines that everyone else had given up on. I wasn't an executive. I wasn't an investor. I wasn't the owner of a successful company. I spent decades covered in grease, welding cracked steel, rebuilding engines, and helping small factories stay alive. The work never made me famous, but it paid enough to raise my son after my wife passed away when he was only 12. After retirement, my life became quiet. I lived alone in a modest townhouse on the edge of Portland. The furniture was old but sturdy. My pickup truck had more than 300,000 miles on it, and I repaired it myself whenever something broke. I never saw a reason to replace things that still worked. To me, money was something to protect, not something to display. Unfortunately, my son never saw life the same way. Darian Vale Mercer had become everything modern society admired. He wore tailored suits that cost more than my monthly expenses. He attended exclusive business events, shook hands with wealthy investors, and married into one of the most influential families in the city. Every photograph he posted online showed expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, and smiling business partners. His entire world revolved around appearances. At first, I was proud of him. I believed his success meant all the sacrifices I had made were worth it. But over the years, something inside him changed. Our conversations became shorter. His visits became less frequent. Phone calls turned into unanswered voicemail messages. Whenever I suggested having dinner together, he always had another meeting, another conference, another business trip. I convinced myself that successful people simply had busy schedules. That explanation comforted me longer than it should have. Then Christmas came. For the first time in decades, I spent it completely alone. A package arrived 2 days later. Inside was a generic holiday card with no handwritten message. It looked as though someone in his office had mailed hundreds of identical cards at once. My own son hadn't even signed his name. I placed the card inside a kitchen drawer and told myself not to think too much about it. Spring arrived. Then summer. Months passed without a single visit. Even my grandchildren stopped calling me. Their birthdays came and went without invitations. Family photographs appeared online, filled with smiling faces, while I quietly realized I was no longer included in those memories. I never confronted Darian. Part of being a father is protecting your child, even from difficult conversations. Then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, I made a decision. Instead of waiting for another ignored phone call, I would visit him in person. Mercer Dynamics occupied the top floors of a modern glass tower downtown. I had never been inside before. The lobby reflected polished marble from every direction. Employees hurried through security gates wearing expensive suits while carrying laptops and coffee cups that probably cost more than my breakfast. I suddenly became aware of my appearance. My denim jacket had been repaired twice along one sleeve. My work boots were clean but badly worn. The faded cap I always wore had tiny burn marks left over from years of welding. For just a moment, I considered turning around. Then I reminded myself of something simple. I wasn't visiting a stranger. I was visiting my son. I approached the reception desk with a polite smile and introduced myself. The young receptionist looked surprised when I gave my name. She typed something into her computer before forcing an uncomfortable smile. "Please wait here, sir." She picked up her phone. Less than 2 minutes later, 2 security guards quietly walked into the lobby. That was the moment I realized something was terribly wrong. The two security guards stopped several feet away from me without saying a word. They weren't aggressive, but they watched me closely, as though they had already been told I might cause trouble. I looked from one guard to the other before turning back toward the receptionist, who suddenly found great interest in the papers on her desk instead of meeting my eyes. "I'm only here to see my son," I said calmly. "His name is Darian Mercer." Neither guard answered. Almost another minute passed before the elevator doors opened. Out stepped Darian. He walked confidently across the marble floor in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, followed by 3 senior executives and a woman carrying a digital tablet. His polished shoes echoed through the lobby as conversations around us gradually faded. People sensed something unusual was happening and slowed their pace to watch. For a brief second, I smiled. It had been months since I'd seen my son face to face. "Darian," I called gently. He stopped several feet away, his expression completely unreadable. There was no surprise, no warmth, no sign that he was happy to see me. Instead, he sighed as if my presence had interrupted something important. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I wanted to see you," I replied. "You haven't answered my calls. I thought maybe we could have lunch together." Several employees nearby pretended not to listen, but I noticed every one of them had slowed down. Darian glanced toward the executives standing behind him. One of them raised an eyebrow, waiting to see how he would handle the situation. Then my son smiled. It wasn't the smile I remembered from his childhood. It was calculated, cold, designed for an audience. "You should have called first," he said. "I tried. You should have kept trying." "I did." He folded his arms across his chest. "You can't just show up here." I didn't think visiting my own son required an appointment. A few people exchanged awkward looks. For the first time, I sensed embarrassment spreading across the lobby. Not mine. His. He cared far more about how this scene looked than why I had come. One executive leaned toward him and quietly asked, "Everything all right?" Darian laughed. A loud, theatrical laugh that echoed across the open lobby. "Oh, everything's fine," he replied. "This is just my father." The word father sounded less like family and more like an inconvenience. He turned toward the small crowd that had gathered nearby. "You know what's funny," he said. "People always ask me where I learned discipline and ambition." No one answered. They assume it came from him. He pointed directly at me. "I can assure you it didn't." The room became painfully quiet. I felt dozens of strangers watching us. I wanted to tell him this wasn't the place. I wanted to ask if we could speak privately. Before I could say anything, he continued. "My father spent his life fixing broken machines instead of building something meaningful. He never understood success." The executives gave polite, uncomfortable smiles. One woman lowered her eyes toward the floor. I remained silent. Not because I agreed. Because I couldn't believe my own son was speaking this way. "I worked for everything I have," Darian continued. "Unlike some people, I didn't expect life to hand me anything." His words struck harder than I expected. I had worked overtime for years to pay his tuition. I sold my fishing boat so he could attend a leadership program. I refinanced my house when he wanted to start graduate school without taking on debt. I had never reminded him of those sacrifices because love shouldn't come with receipts. Apparently, memory fades when pride grows. He took one slow step closer until only a few feet separated us. His voice became louder. Louder on purpose. "You're a failed, freeloader, old man." The sentence echoed through the lobby. Someone gasped. Even one of the security guards looked uncomfortable. I searched my son's face, hoping to find regret. There was none. Only confidence. As though humiliating me somehow proved he belonged among the wealthy people surrounding him. Then he looked toward the guards. "Please escort him outside." Neither guard moved immediately. For a brief moment, they hesitated. They understood exactly what they had just witnessed. Finally, one of them approached me respectfully. "I'm sorry, sir." I nodded. "I know." Without resisting, I walked toward the revolving doors. As they closed behind me, I caught one last glimpse of Darian straightening his suit before returning to his executives as though nothing had happened. I sat alone on a bench across the street while rain began falling harder against the pavement. I stared at the company logo shining above the entrance and wondered where I had lost my son. Then my phone vibrated. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. I answered. A calm woman's voice spoke only one sentence before everything I believed about my future changed forever. "Mr. Gustav Tornik, we've been trying to locate you regarding an inheritance." For a moment, I thought someone was playing a cruel joke. An inheritance. I looked across the street at the glass tower where my son had just thrown me out as though I were an embarrassment. My emotions were still tangled between disappointment and disbelief. The timing of the call felt almost impossible. "I'm sorry," I said into the phone. "I think you have the wrong person." The woman answered without hesitation. "Are you Gustav Elias Tornik, born on October 18, 1958? "Yes." "Then we have the correct person." Her voice remained calm and professional. "My name is Celine Corrigan. I am a senior estate attorney with Corrigan and Price in Boston. We've been searching for you for nearly 3 weeks." I frowned. "I don't know anyone in Boston." "You knew Dr. Alistair Vexmore." The name stopped me cold. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over 40 years. For a few seconds, the traffic around me disappeared into silence. Alistair. I could still picture him exactly as he had been in his early 30s, thin, energetic, endlessly curious, always carrying a notebook filled with impossible ideas. We met when I was a young industrial mechanic working night shifts in a small engineering shop. He rented space in the same warehouse to build experimental battery systems that almost everyone believed would fail. Most investors laughed at him. Most engineers refused to work with him. I didn't. Not because I expected success. Because I admired people willing to solve difficult problems. "I remember him," I answered quietly. "He passed away last month." The words settled heavily in my chest. Despite the decades that had passed, I never imagined hearing about his death through a stranger. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "So are we." Before his passing, Dr. Vexmore left detailed legal instructions concerning you. "It is essential that we meet in person." "What does this have to do with an inheritance?" "I cannot discuss every detail over the phone. However, I can confirm that you have been named the principal beneficiary of his estate." I laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because it sounded impossible. There must be some misunderstanding. "I wasn't family." "No," Celine replied. "You were something else entirely." She refused to explain further. Instead, she asked whether I could travel to Boston the following morning. Normally, I would have declined immediately. I disliked flying, disliked unnecessary travel even more, and had no reason to believe this wasn't some elaborate mistake. Then she mentioned something only 2 people had ever known. The prototype designated Project Ember. My grip tightened around the phone. Project Ember. No newspaper had ever reported that name. No patent filing included it. Alistair and I had deliberately erased every reference before presenting the finished technology to investors decades earlier. Only he and I knew it had existed. My doubts began to fade. "I'll come," I finally said. "Excellent. A driver will meet you at Logan Airport." The call ended. I remained seated for several minutes, staring at nothing. Rain continued to fall. My clothes were damp, but I barely noticed. My thoughts drifted back to those long nights inside the old warehouse. Alistair wasn't a businessman then. He was simply an inventor chasing an idea everyone else dismissed. The biggest obstacle had never been the battery chemistry. It had been heat management. Every prototype overheated within minutes. One evening, while repairing a damaged hydraulic press, I noticed a cooling pattern that industrial systems used under extreme pressure. The concept seemed unrelated. Until it wasn't. I spent 2 nights modifying his design. When we tested the new version, it continued operating hour after hour without catastrophic failure. Alistair stared at the results before laughing like a child. "You've just solved the problem that changes everything," he had said. I shrugged. "I just fixed what was broken." He insisted my name belong beside his on every future document. I refused. I didn't want attention. I didn't want interviews. I certainly didn't want investors asking questions about an unknown mechanic. Eventually he accepted my decision, though he never seemed happy about it. Over the years we exchanged a handful of letters before gradually losing contact. Life simply carried us in different directions. Now, somehow, after all this time, he had reached back into my life from beyond the grave. I stood from the bench and started toward my truck. As I unlocked the driver's door, another thought crossed my mind. If Alistair had left me something valuable, who else already knew? Somewhere, in another city, another office, another conversation had already begun. And I had the uneasy feeling I wasn't the only person preparing for what came next. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, memories of Alistair Vexmore mixed with the image of my son ordering security to remove me from his office. One memory reminded me that loyalty still existed. The other reminded me how quickly people could forget everything that had been done for them. By sunrise, I had packed a single travel bag. There wasn't much to bring. A few changes of clothes, my reading glasses, some medication, and an old leather notebook I had kept since my working years. Before locking the front door, I looked around the quiet townhouse. It had never been impressive, but every object inside carried memories that money could never replace. The flight to Boston felt longer than it actually was. I spent most of the trip staring through the window, wondering whether I was walking into a legal misunderstanding that would end with an apology and a return flight home. When the plane landed, my phone vibrated. A text message appeared from an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Tornick, your driver is waiting outside Terminal C." Exactly as Celine had promised. Outside the airport stood a black luxury sedan. The driver, a gray-haired man wearing a dark suit, stepped forward before I could introduce myself. "Mr. Tornick?" "Yes. My name is Victor. Ms. Corrigan asked me to bring you directly to the office." The drive into downtown Boston passed quietly. Victor never asked personal questions. Instead, he spoke about the weather, traffic, and the city's ongoing construction projects. I appreciated that. Too many people assumed silence needed to be filled with conversation. Half an hour later, we stopped in front of a historic stone building overlooking the harbor. The brass plaque beside the entrance read, "Corrigan and Price Estate Law." Inside, everything felt understated rather than extravagant. Wooden bookshelves lined the walls, and framed legal certificates covered the hallway. The office reflected confidence instead of wealth. A receptionist greeted me immediately. "Mr. Tornick, Ms. Corrigan is expecting you." She led me into a spacious conference room. A woman in her early 50s stood as I entered. She wore a navy blue suit and thin silver-framed glasses. Her handshake was firm, and unlike nearly everyone I had met recently, she looked directly into my eyes instead of judging the condition of my jacket. "Mr. Tornick, thank you for coming." "Please," I replied. "Call me Gustav." She smiled. "Then you may call me Celine." Once we were seated, she opened a thick leather folder. "I imagine you have many questions. I have one important question." She nodded. "Go ahead." "Why me?" Instead of answering immediately, she slid an old photograph across the polished table. I picked it up. The picture had faded with age, but I recognized it instantly. Two young men stood inside an industrial workshop. One was smiling broadly while holding a notebook. The other looked uncomfortable having his picture taken. That second man was me. Beside me stood Alistair. We found dozens of photographs like this among Dr. Vexmore's personal belongings, Celine explained. Every one of them was carefully preserved. She opened another folder. Inside were handwritten journals. Every page belonged to Alistair. Some entries were marked with dates from more than 40 years ago. Celine carefully turned several pages before stopping. I think you should read this yourself. I adjusted my glasses and began reading. If history remembers only my name, then history will be incomplete. Gustav Tornik solved the engineering problem no one else could solve. Without him, there would have been no breakthrough. Without him, there would have been no company. If I fail to correct that injustice during my lifetime, then my estate must do it after my death. I stopped reading. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Alistair had never forgotten. Not once. Celine quietly continued. He repeated that statement in multiple legal documents over the last 15 years. I slowly closed the journal. I never wanted recognition. He knew that. Then why leave me everything? Celine folded her hands together. Because he believed gratitude should never expire. She reached for another folder. This one was considerably thicker. Across the cover appeared a simple typed label. Final estate transfer. She looked at me with complete seriousness. What I'm about to show you will likely change the rest of your life. Before she could open the folder, someone knocked sharply on the conference room door. Celine frowned. She hadn't been expecting anyone. Neither had I. The sharp knock interrupted the silence inside the conference room. Celine glanced toward the door before calmly saying, "Come in." A young legal assistant stepped inside carrying a tablet, but the expression on his face immediately told me something had gone wrong. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, looking directly at Celine. "You need to see this." She accepted the tablet and quietly read whatever had appeared on the screen. Her composed expression hardened. "Excuse us for one moment," she said before standing and walking with the assistant into the hallway. The conference room door closed behind them. I remained seated, surrounded by shelves of legal documents that suddenly felt much heavier than paper. Whatever had happened, it clearly wasn't routine. Several minutes later, Celine returned alone. "I'm afraid our meeting has become more complicated." "What happened?" She placed the tablet on the table and rotated it toward me. A financial news website filled the screen. The headline read, "Vexmore Technologies expected to announce immediate ownership transition." Below the article appeared another name, Magnus Ravelock. I had never heard of him. "Who's Magnus Ravelock?" I asked. Celine sat down before answering. "One of the most aggressive private equity investors in the country." She tapped another article. "For nearly 2 years, he's been negotiating to acquire controlling ownership of Vexmore Technologies after Dr. Vexmore's passing. And your inheritance prevents that acquisition." I leaned back in my chair. "So he's disappointed." "It's much worse than disappointment." She opened another document containing emails that had recently been obtained during the estate review. Someone leaked confidential probate information less than 24 hours after Dr. Vexmore died. I frowned. "I thought wills remained private." "They do." "Then how?" "We're still investigating." She pointed toward one particular email. The sender's identity had been hidden, but the message itself was clear. "Locate Gustav Tornik immediately. Delay estate transfer by any legal means available." I read the sentence twice. My stomach tightened. Why would anyone care about me? "Because legally, you now stand between Magnus Ravelock and a multi-billion-dollar acquisition." She opened another folder. This is where things become disturbing. Inside were reports prepared by private investigators. The first contained my photograph leaving a grocery store. Another showed me repairing my truck. Another showed me sitting alone outside my house reading a newspaper. Someone had been watching me. 4 months. I don't understand. Celine looked directly at me. They weren't trying to rob you. They were studying you. I slowly turned another page. Medical history. Property records. Utility bills. Retirement income. Everything. My entire life had been examined by strangers. Then I reached the final page. Across the top, someone had typed a sentence in bold letters. Potential evidence of cognitive decline. I looked up immediately. I've never been diagnosed with dementia. I know. They're lying. Exactly. Celine folded her hands together. If someone convinces a court that you're mentally incapable of managing the inheritance, control could temporarily shift to a court-appointed administrator. And during that delay, Magnus Ravelock gains valuable time to complete his acquisition. The room suddenly felt smaller. I had spent my entire life avoiding unnecessary attention. Now complete strangers were attempting to erase my credibility before I had even accepted the inheritance. I rubbed my forehead. This is unbelievable. It gets worse. She placed one final document in front of me. Unlike the others, this report contained photographs taken only weeks earlier. I recognized the location immediately. Mercer Dynamics. My son's company. Several pictures showed Darian entering a private restaurant. Across the table from him sat a man with silver hair, wearing an expensive black suit. Celine quietly pointed toward the man's face. That's Magnus Ravelock. I stared at the photograph. My heartbeat slowed. Not from fear. From realization. My son's humiliation of me suddenly looked very different. This wasn't simply embarrassment. This wasn't only pride. Someone had been influencing him. Maybe manipulating him. Or perhaps offering him something in return. What exactly is their relationship? I asked. We don't know yet. But the timing concerns us. She handed me another photograph. This one showed Darian and Magnus shaking hands outside a downtown hotel less than a week before Dr. Vexmore died. Neither man knew they had been photographed. I looked at my son smiling beside a billionaire I'd never met. For the first time since leaving Portland, I stopped asking why all this was happening. Instead, I began asking a different question. How much did Darian already know? I stared at the photograph for a long time. Darian and Magnus Ravelock stood outside an expensive hotel, smiling as if they had just finalized an important business agreement. My son looked confident. Magnus looked satisfied. Neither expression gave away what they had actually discussed, but the timing alone was enough to raise questions. I finally looked up at Celine. Can you prove they were working together? She slowly shook her head. Not yet. Then this picture isn't enough. No, she admitted. A photograph shows that two people met. It doesn't prove what they said. I slid the picture back across the table. Then we need facts. For the first time since arriving in Boston, Celine smiled. That's exactly what Dr. Vexmore hoped you would say. She unlocked a slim metal briefcase resting beside her chair and removed a sealed envelope with my name handwritten across the front. The handwriting was unmistakable. Alistair's. I was instructed to give this to you only after informing you about Mr. Ravelock. She handed it to me. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, suggesting it had been prepared years before Alistair passed away. Carefully, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Gustav, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and certain people have probably begun fighting over everything we built. I know you never cared about wealth. That is exactly why I trusted you more than anyone else. If anyone challenges your integrity, do not waste time arguing with them. Instead, Find the truth I left behind. Everything you need is still inside Warehouse 17. Do not trust appearances. Do not trust public statements. Trust evidence. You once told me that every broken machine leaves clues. People do the same. Your friend, Alistair. I lowered the letter. Warehouse 17. Celine nodded. The property still belongs to the estate. I thought it had been demolished decades ago. So did everyone else. She opened another folder containing property records. The building was quietly preserved under a holding company created by Dr. Vexmore. I looked closer. The address instantly brought back memories. A forgotten industrial district near the river. That warehouse had been our second home during those long years of experimentation. I haven't been there in over 40 years. Neither has anyone else, according to the records. My mind raced through old memories. Workbench. Prototype batteries. Cooling systems. Metal cabinets. Shelves filled with notebooks. Then another memory surfaced. The archive room. Small. Windowless. Protected by a reinforced steel door because Alistair insisted every experiment be documented. Back then I thought he was simply being overly cautious. Now I wasn't so sure. When can we go? I asked. Celine checked her watch. The property manager can meet us this afternoon. Less than 2 hours later, we left the law office. Instead of returning to the airport or checking into a hotel, we drove toward the oldest industrial section of Boston. Many of the factories had closed years earlier. Brick buildings stood abandoned beside rusting railroad tracks. Nature had slowly reclaimed parking lots that once held hundreds of workers' vehicles. Finally, Victor stopped beside a chain-link fence surrounding a weathered warehouse. The faded number painted above the entrance read, 17. Even after 4 decades, I recognized it immediately. Dust covered nearly every surface. Broken windows reflected gray afternoon clouds. From the outside, it looked completely forgotten. A property manager unlocked the heavy entrance door before quickly leaving us alone. The large steel door groaned as I pushed it open. The familiar smell of aged metal, oil, and old timber filled the air. Nothing had changed. Old machinery remained exactly where we had left it. Workbenches still stood against the walls. Even faded safety posters were hanging in the same places. It felt less like entering an abandoned building and more like stepping backward through time. I slowly walked farther inside. Every footstep echoed across the empty warehouse. Then I noticed something strange. Near the rear wall, fresh muddy footprints crossed the dusty concrete floor. Someone had been inside recently. I crouched beside the marks. The dust around them had remained untouched for years. Except for those prints. I looked toward Celine. She had seen them too. Without saying a word, we both understood the same thing. We weren't the first people to come looking for whatever Alistair had hidden inside Warehouse 17.